But I call my presentation In Pursuit of Beauty. For me, it's exploring aesthetics, which is the study of beauty, in light of a tripartite experience of Christ, or a threefold experience of Christ. No, that's perfect. Okay, you can't really see the middle circle because of the colors, but it's a circle. So imagine neutral isn't like nothing, there's an actual circle there. But anyway, this is what scholars call the sacred secular divide. The idea that there are things of God and there are things that are not of God. The secular things of the world or of sin. But when I hear people talking about this in church, especially in evangelical circles, they almost always talk about kind of a third category, a neutral category, that it's not necessarily good, it's not really bad, it's not something they would encourage. It's kind of like sugar at the top of the food pyramid, where you're not going to encourage to have too much of it, but I mean, it's not going to kill you, that type of thing. And most typically, the things that people put in this category are leisure related. They're things that are fun, that we enjoy. So we'll say, oh yeah, I love going to the movies, but we're not going to put it on the same level as, praying, reading our Bible, or anything like that. Can you guys all hear me? Am I loud enough? Okay, good. I don't like microphones sometimes. I like to walk around and use my hands. So it's like going to a movie, no one would put it on the same level as sharing your faith with someone or something like that. But you also wouldn't put it in those lists of sins that Paul has, brawling and slander and malice and hate and such. But you wouldn't really encourage it. And it always struck me as odd. Like, why is there this neutral category? There's nothing in the Bible that talks about, there are good things and bad things, and things we don't really, we don't encourage, but they're okay. The Bible doesn't talk about like that at all. So this is the way I would frame the world. That there's things that are sinful and there are things that are godly. There are things that are good in and of themselves, and there are things that are evil in and of themselves because they've been corrupted since the fall. And this is going to be important later on, so we'll come back to this. I'm never going to make fun of you again. Where's the receiver? Is it back here? Okay.
You're supposed to point at the screen.
Oh, you're supposed to point at the screen.
You can't.
Oh, it's made by Honeywell. I work with Honeywell. So my main thesis is that Jesus himself stated where our desire for beauty comes from. And he states this in John 14:6, which reads, Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. And there, he's highlighting our main goal, coming to the Father. Every religion, even not Christianity, is all about coming to the transcendent, touching the transcendent in some way, approaching him. And in Christianity, we say we've been separated by sin, and we want to approach the Father. Again, Jesus says there's one way to do this, it's through him. But strangely, he lays out three parts of his identity before he says that. And to me, that gives us a clue that there are three main things that come into our experience of Christ, our relationship with him. Oh, that's so tiny. You can't read it. I'm sorry. I'll read it for you. So you can see itty little red words there. That's interlinear translation of this verse. And there I'm highlighting the words way, truth, and life. And in Greek, way is hodos, truth is aletheia, and life is zoe, where we get our name Zoe from. So first I'm going to talk about Jesus as hodos, the way. The Greek word hodos, conveniently enough, is very similar to our English word for way. Like we talk about the way to church, which to this on this particular Saturday was blocked, as many of you found out on, Chestnut Ridge? Yeah, a little surprise. But it's a physical route, and we understand that. And in Greek, hodos could mean a physical route, a path or a road or something like that. But it can also mean a metaphorical one. So we talk about the way of Christ. We don't mean some physical, like going to Jerusalem and walking the road that he walked on. What we mean is following him morally, living our life the way he lived. And hodos also means that. It's this metaphorical path that you can follow. It has a third meaning that is really intriguing, that it's figuratively a mode or a means for the path. So not only did Jesus lay out the moral path for us, but he is actually, through the vehicle of the Holy Spirit, the mode for travel along the path at the same time. He's kind of the destination and the means to get there, which I think is kind of cool. But this is the fact that I think is kind of clearest to us as evangelical believers, for those of us that are. And going back to our initial kind of dichotomy I had, remember the sin and God?
I think the experience of every one of these facets of Christ can be divided into two separate camps. And this is pretty simple. It's either we're either following him or not following him. So there's no in the middle. There's no neutral category. You're either walking after Christ or you're walking away from him. Standing still is effectively walking away, right? Next one. Jesus of the Aletheia, the truth. Aletheia is also a good translation because it essentially means the same thing as our word for truth. Although there is this one unique aspect where when a Greek talks about Aletheia, they mean the world as it actually is. So not my perception of it. To tell a Greek, you have your Aletheia and my Aletheia, and they're different, they would look at you dumbfounded because there's only one Aletheia. It's the truth. The world as actually it is. We would say the world as God sees it, not the world as we perceive it. Two, and I would say the facet of Aletheia, we are pursuing truth or not pursuing truth. And interestingly enough, pursuing truth involves knowing lies, but you know that they're lies. So studying the ways of the world. I love reading Nietzsche, partly because he's hilariously confident in himself. Nietzsche's an atheist philosopher, by the way. He's hilariously confident in himself, but also because he is so unbelievably wrong. It's really important to know him, and to know how he makes his arguments and why he thinks he's right. But he's the polar opposite of Christ. You can't get farther away from Christ than Nietzsche. He's on the opposite. I mean, I guess maybe Satan. We could get into that. But it's pretty far away. But I think the only way you can move away from truth is by actually believing lies. Knowing them, even God knows lies. And we want to pursue the mind of God, right? But when you actually believe these lies is when you start falling away from the truth. And the last one, my favorite, is Jesus says, Zoe, the life. Now, Zoe also means, very similar to our word for life, physical life. Like we all have life in this room. None of us are dead, hopefully. And it also means spiritual life, the way we talk about. We have a new life in Christ. That's something that's been rejuvenated spiritually. We were dead and we now have life. But it also has another meaning that you see coming back again and again in the New Testament, where it talks about the fullness of life, the life abundant. In Ephesians, I think Paul uses the phrase, be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. And to me, that gives us a clue that this isn't just talking about, now we're going to go to heaven once we've been saved, and we're not going to be in hell forever, or something like that. It's talking about the way life is meant to be lived now. And I think he's talking about enjoyment. And this is echoed in something like the Westminster Catechism, which says that the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. What better way to enjoy him than to experience the things that he created for us originally, the way they were supposed to be experienced? So for me, the experience of facet of Zoe is you're either pursuing life, and it's always the life God intends, or you're pursuing something that's not life. And that's you're pursuing what you think is life, but is not what God intends. And it really leads to death. And I also, because we're talking about enjoyment, I think we can talk about the facet of Zoe as being beauty. Because I think beauty or aesthetics describes how we enjoy the world. And we experience it in 6 ways. 5 are the senses, all name, taste and touch and sight and sound and smell. When we enjoy these, we're enjoying it hopefully the way God intended. The 6th one for me is sort of an intellectual apprehension. This is where we get humor. Humor is not something you can touch or feel, but when we see something that is funny, it's an intellectual appreciation of it. It catches us off guard, it surprises us in some way, or it's clever. And that's also a facet of beauty. Or when we read something that's just incredibly well written, like some of the poetry we heard earlier, or the Cadman's hymn that I read, or we hear a piece like Wages. We're appreciating the beauty. I think we're moving towards life and away from death. So this is how I would illustrate the way we should experience Christ. We should be fully following him, fully discovering his truth, the truth about him, his nature, our nature, the world he created, the people he placed in the world with us, and fully experiencing his beauty, and the beauty of the world around us, the beauty of his nature, everything like that. But, and this is kind of the crux of my talk, this is the way I think many in the evangelical church live and talk about it. Here, the truth and the life, 2 facets that clearly Christ intended to be taken equally with the way, are subverted. They're devalued for the purposes of the way. Now, the way itself, there's nothing wrong with it. We want to pursue God wholeheartedly in the moral sphere and be following after him, becoming more like Christ day by day. But when we take anything that is true, and the only reason we value it is if it helps our walk, we're devaluing truth. Jesus was clear that truth is a good in and of itself. He pursues truth. It's part of his nature. So we should pursue truth with the same sort of tenacity we pursue virtue. We understand that virtue is part of who Christ is. We want to be more like him, so we pursue that. We should have the same reaction to truth. And even worse is the way we treat beauty. We totally subvert the value of beauty for what I would call pedagogical purposes, like worship music. We can't just enjoy it as worship music. It has to teach. And it's great if it teaches. By its nature, most beauty does teach. But can't we just revel in it as beauty and realize that by enjoying this beauty, we're actually, in fact, coming close to Christ? You know, if we live like this, then every sphere, every aspect of our lives is in some way bringing us closer to who God is, closer to who Christ is. Because we're actually living life the way he intended. We're experiencing the world the way he wanted us to. And we're getting a little piece of heaven here on earth before we experience the fullness of it later. So, when I was developing this paper last summer, I talked to a lot of people about it, and these were the two biggest objections I got. The first one, by far, was the most popular. And it's the idea that heart condition, or this moral pursuit of Christ, must be the sole focus of the church. And it kind of ties into the second question, where they would say, like, if we start getting away from only emphasizing obedience, only emphasizing the heart condition, we're going to lose it. The only way we can keep this focus, or keep this, is if we only focus on it. And I just think that's not true. And to illustrate this, let me tell a story. When I was in undergrad, I was part of the praise team for Campus Crusade. I went to school in Ohio. And I played piano for them. And as an artist, it was a great way for me to express in a Christian setting. You know, I express a lot in a secular setting, but it was great to express in a worshipful setting. And when we would go up to play, like I would go up with the same mindset that I always have when I perform art. Like, this should be beautiful, right? So we would pray beforehand, and I would always pray something along the lines of, I say, Lord, I just pray that we would use our abilities to the best that we can. I pray that we give our utmost for your highest glory. I like to steal from multiple chambers if I can. And I would pray, I just pray that this would be a beautiful sound, like in and of itself. You know, that this would be lovely and pleasing to you. You know, like essentially we'd make good art, right? And then very often the next person after me, usually it was our worship leader was the guitarist. It was usually him. He would say, oh, even if we play poorly, I pray that our hearts will be in the right place. And everybody would nod, and I would just think, that just strikes me as, I mean, it's not totally wrong, right? I wouldn't want to play beautifully and, you know, have an ugly heart all the time. That would be, I mean, if you're going to have one or the other, clearly the heart is the way to go. But I thought, that doesn't seem very Christ-like. He was never about, well, let's take the least worst option that we can. You know, it's like, the cross, like, I don't know, murder in the street. You know, he's not taking the least worst option. He's saying the absolute best that we can achieve, because that's what God is about. He is perfectly excellent, and we should try to achieve that. To give a different analogy, imagine that you're going in for a very important life-saving surgery, and you're on the bed, the anesthetist is coming over, and they're getting ready to put you under, and you look over and you see the surgery team gathered in prayer. And at first you're encouraged, right? Because this is great, you know, the blessing of God is upon them, God will be present here. And then you hear their prayer, and you're a little unsettled because it goes like this. Lord, I just pray that even if we lose this patient today, that our hearts will be right before you. You probably want a different surgery team, right? So, or like if Moses in the desert, he said, Lord, it doesn't matter if we reach the promised land or not. I just pray that our heart's in the right place. It was important that he actually reached the promised land, right? It's important that you don't die on that, you know, surgery table, unless, I guess that's God's plan, right? So I think I would emphasize that you don't lose the heart condition by pursuing beauty or by pursuing truth. I think it's reinforced. I think when you have a fullness of this relationship with Christ, all three come into focus, and you really start to see the world as he intends it. Last of all, some practical steps forward. When I first approached this, I wanted, thought, wouldn't it be great if, like, my music, Wages music, became the music of the church? And we would love that. But I think we understand that it's kind of unlikely. I mean, the church has never, even when it sponsored the works of Bach and stuff like that, it was more for the nobility that they did that. It's always this kind of what we call high art has always been something that's been consumed by a very small number of people. And there's a reason people like popular art. It speaks to them very directly, very clearly, and it's memorable. There's lots of very positive aspects to it. So I understand that my music is probably not going to become the worship music of the church, and that's all right because it has its own place. But what I want to give to you today is the ability, or you already have the ability, the recognition of the beauty that's surrounding you all the time. Every Christian already experiences truth in their life and beauty in their life, and this following after Christ on a daily basis. You don't need anyone to instruct you into how to experience it. You don't need to be an intellectual to appreciate the truth of the Bible, or the truth of getting to know your wife better, getting to know your friends better, or understanding, how your parents raised you like they did, or why they did. Understanding those particular truths. You don't need an education to do that. And you don't need to be an artist to appreciate beauty. The appreciation of beauty, of aesthetics, doesn't need to be explained. We can try to explain it, but it's just natural. It just comes to you. When you see a sunrise and it moves you, you didn't have to have anyone tell you how that happened. It just did. But I think that we don't spend enough time recognizing these things. When I was preparing for this, I had a discussion with my mother about it, and she was like, she realized, I appreciate beauty. There's simple beauty around me all the time, but I never mention it. I never talk about it. I never give it any value. It's just like on my drive to work, she said she would see rolling hills in the background. There's not that many hills in Ohio, so it's fun when you see them. She would see rolling hills in the background. She's like, that's just lovely. But she never put two and two together that the loveliness I experience here is part and parcel of who Christ is at his core. The loveliness you experience in the music that you listen to, the movies that you enjoy, spending time with friends, just that social interaction. The beauty in all those situations is intended to be reflective of the beauty of Christ. And when we experience it that way, I think we get more joy out of it. We come closer to Christ. I think it just is better overall. So that's all I have to say.